Welcome to today's episode of In Conversation With. This fourth series is 5 episodes focused on the US market in association with Unleash America. And I'm very happy to be joined by one of the speakers from that conference today, Jodi from Zoom. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And look, before we hit record, you kindly showed us a picture out the window. It's a beautiful white morning in Connecticut.
It sure is. It's snowing and lovely, and it's good until it ices over.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, before we get into anything else, what do you do for Zoom?
So my role as head of talent and organizational development means that my team is responsible for Zoomies, their integration into the company, all the way through their careers. So the second they start, my team is responsible for the onboarding experience, not so much from a benefits perspective, but more for feeling like you're part of a sense of the community and understanding our values and how things work around here. We are responsible for the growth, the development, the engagement of our people. So I say we're sort of like the happiest part of human resources.
That's a lovely way to look at it. Certainly, kind of in this time where we've been forced to be home, kind of the word happy cannot be overstated enough. It's important. Look, this might sound like a really stupid question because quite clearly Zoom is a video conferencing platform, but there are a number of different enterprise video conferencing platforms out there, and Zoom does feel, I suppose, a little bit different from some of the others. How would you characterize Zoom? What would you say that Zoom do as an organization?
Well, clearly, I might be biased, but we are the best platform. So, and I think, the reason why we became a verb, a noun, an adjective, and everything else in the midst of this pandemic was because our platform is so simple and user-friendly. We've got 85-year-old grandmas and grandpas using it and, 5-year-olds using it. So it's just simple, and I think this platform with our, squares all sizes and chat for people who are introverted to talk and colored boxes for people who like to talk, who are more extroverted, really creates a sense of inclusion and equity that people haven't experienced before. So I think just the simplicity and, the, again, ease of use and the experience creates like a degree of intimacy that I think, has made us so successful.
I think it's interesting that you point out that Zoom has become an adjective for video conferencing in all of its forms. And I mean, it's such a powerful thing for organizations such as, say, Uber. Everyone talks about getting an Uber, whether it's a taxi or another firm. When did you realize that Zoom was beginning to be more than just Zoom?
Yeah, so we became the Kleenex of tissues, right? I mean, it just showed up everywhere in the press. It was funny. I was looking, I have a subscription to buying cartoons. And so, you put in the subject and up pops the cartoons that are related to that subject. So I just put in hybrid work, and 90% of the cartoons had Zoom, a reference to Zoom in the picture and the tagline. So again, we were, made for enterprise. We weren't made for grandmas and 5-year-olds per se, but because it's so easy, like you said, everybody was Zooming, birthdays and, people were Zooming funerals, unfortunately. Zoom, had its first adoptions, marriages, court cases. So, it was just everywhere. And I think we have something called inspired chat. So inspiring stories. So Zoomies post inspiring stories that come from everywhere. And, that chat channel was just blowing up. So I think that's when we kind of realized we were truly cooler than we ever knew.
I think it's really interesting that you stress the point that you were created for enterprise, because the surge in use has certainly been in that consumer space. And I have done quizzes and be on Zoom late at night in the pandemic and with family members. And as you said, I know people that have been married over it and so on, with people dialing into those big life events. I suppose the interesting thing is then how do you avoid fatigue in that consumer base and also translate some of that growth back into the enterprise usage, if that is the strategy? Because that might be a bit of a challenge, right? Because it's become so associated with those life events in the consumer market.
Yeah. Look, we're happy they're not calling it Microsoft Teams fatigue, quite frankly. But, the idea, is just the association of being in front of the screen. And, people are fatigued by sitting home in front of a screen. People sometimes feel compelled, depending on your company culture, to keep the screen on. We teach people to, or give permission. If you need to turn your screen off, turn your screen off. Get up, walk around. On Wednesdays we have no meeting Wednesdays, literally. So we try to minimize sort of the Zoom fatigue. But it's really code for making sure that you're doing things to take care of yourself and you're not just sitting in front of the screen. It's hard for people to feel on. And as I said, the good part about Zoom is that it creates a level of intimacy and connection and focus that may not have been as present live, because it kind of demands this, like, you're looking at me and you're paying attention. And so if you need to contract around shutting your screen off, or, we do things like, sorry, everybody, like, I'm eating lunch, and, someone's walking around, and, they might be walking around their kitchen, so they're not present in the screen, but they're like, I'm listening. Like, those are the kinds of things that, we've gotten comfortable doing to kind of combat the Zoom fatigue.
I hope this question comes across in the manner which is intended, because I don't want it to appear trite in any way. But you mentioned before we hit record that 15% of Zoomies, as you call them, which was new to me today, but Zoomies were remote pre-COVID. And then if we think about it, Zoom became the tool that enabled homeschooling and education. It became the tool that we saw governments use, that we saw the World Health Organization use. It's really been at the heart of society getting through the last 2 years. Now, whilst you mentioned that the organization started as an enterprise, and you would have had company values and cultures, that's a significant responsibility for an organization to bear for the last 2 years. That is not the same as, here's a video conferencing platform, please use us in your business. How has that impacted the culture and the thinking of your organization?
It isn't trite to say that values drive behavior. I know we hear that a lot, especially in the organizational development world, and companies who are trying to recruit. But our values around care, care for ourselves, care for our customers, care for our team, care for our community, was so amped up in the midst of this crisis. I mean, Zoomies were hyper vigilant around caring for our customers in the midst of this crisis. But what is we forget is that, while companies have scaled at rapid rate, none of us have ever experienced a pandemic. I don't think the two have ever been combined, right? So that rapid scale in the midst of a pandemic, with this, again, hyper responsibility to take care of people. And so in March, just like everybody else, Zoomies went home, and Zoomies had, kids to homeschool, and Zoomies maybe had family or friends who were sick or potentially, or died, or they were out of work. I mean, there was no Zoomie that wasn't, experiencing the effects of the pandemic, loneliness, isolation, like everything that every non-Zoomie was experiencing, while we had the privilege of keeping the world connected, and that we took very seriously that we were helping companies keep their employees connected and keep their employees safe. And so my team's role, who ordinarily is to help with, growth and development, like there was no time for training in the midst of this crisis. And so what we did was we took an hour and had intact teams go through a very structured sort of intervention around how are you doing? How are you taking care of yourselves? What are you learning? What are you learning about each other? What are you learning about your leadership? What do you want to take forward after this crisis? And so these were really powerful and positive experiences. And Zoomies, who, again, in the midst of the crisis, so like one of the roles we have a business development representative, and their job, non-pandemic, is to fish for leads all day. That's all they do. Fish, fish, fish. Hey, David, do you have Zoom? If not, let's talk. But the fish were jumping in the boat. And so those employees were deployed to other parts of the organization. So they learned to answer Zendesk tickets, and they learned to fulfill orders in the surge of the business coming in. And so when we say to those Zoomies, well, what are you learning? Well, they were learning, about parts of the business that they never knew. They were meeting people in the business that they never knew. And so when you think about, again, I own development, once the crisis abates, if you were to hire somebody who has had lots of different experiences at Zoom versus maybe an outsider, you would probably take the person who has lots of different experiences at Zoom. And so there were lots of silver linings in the middle of the crisis that we stopped and let teams pause and reflect and kind of rejuvenate and move forward. So it's been very stressful, but it's also been really cool. And I use the word privilege because I am proud, and our Zoomies are really proud to, be a part of the first adoption ever at Zoom, via Zoom, those kinds of things, those kinds of stories.
I suppose as head of talent and organisational development, it now gives you an enviable headache in as much as if we are coming out of the other side of this now, fingers crossed, God willing that we are, how do you balance what you've been for the last 2 years versus perhaps what you were and what you may be? Because it might be that you are slightly more back in the times where your business development teams need to go looking for fishing for leads and so on again, because I don't think we're ever going to go back to a 5 days a week in an office culture, but there will be less time spent on video platforms. People will want to meet in person, and we are moving into a hybrid world where lots of people have gotten used to these platforms. So I suppose there's a balancing act there for you, right, in terms of what is Zoom now?
Just like you said, I can't imagine that progressive companies that want the best talent will get employees that are required to work in an office 5 days a week. I mean, there's lots of talk about the Great Resignation and employees picking employers of choice, and employers who maybe traditionally said, oh yeah, we're a 5 day a week kind of place, and there's no way we're making people come back, like have had to rethink and readjust. So I don't think Zoom is ever going away. I think Zoom will, like you said, it'll be part of our nomenclature, and we will get used to, and we do have technology where you can be in the office and have people at home and still have a unifying experience. Like in the olden days, one person who was home and everybody was in office, you had a video of everybody sitting in around office, and that other voice completely, like in the distance. Well, we're still going to be able to see everybody in equal boxes. So I think it's just going to be part of our DNA. And in terms of like where we were, where we are, where we're going, we're so lucky to have all of those experiences and in our evolution that have made us more nimble and more adaptable. And also from a sort of an HR perspective, we cannot, and I don't believe we will ever go back to a workplace where the word feelings doesn't come into the conversation. And understanding people's, the depths of people's personal lives and their humanness, I don't think we'll ever be able to go back to that, because we've lived it for 2 years, and that's really positive, to bring that authenticity into the workplace. I think it'll be interesting, the balance of, how much, like, we saw a lot of people's personal lives, but before we saw almost nothing. But I think having the experience of understanding that we're all human is really positive moving forward.
So you mentioned talent acquisition in terms of what organisations might look for in staff. And I suppose this would be an interesting place to finish, because I could make an assumption here, but I don't want to. I'd love to just find out from you whether or not recruiting technology staff for you as an organisation has gotten harder or easier in recent months.
Every single person on my team has been hired online. I've met one person on my team live. What do you, in an interviewing situation, what do you not get here that you would get if somebody was sitting in a room?
Oh, absolutely. I was just curious about kind of, I suppose, if you're finding the market is more competitive now because it's a big pool that you're fishing in, because everyone can fish in the same pool geographically, versus the idea that, do we need some proximity to the office? And then also you've got the added factor of, all of a sudden, you're a name that everybody knows, whereas prior to the pandemic, perhaps a smaller proportion of the market would have been familiar with your brand. So I can make a huge bunch of assumptions how that's affecting your hiring, but I don't really want to jump to conclusions.
It is a employees market. Top talent is always sought after. Top talent, I think the engineers that get offers at Zoom also get like 7 other offers at other companies. That's a statistic that's like in my head. You need to be a compelling employer, outside of salary, professional development and career mobility, all the culture, all those things are things that candidates are weighing. Are you a company dedicated to diversity and inclusion? How active are your practices? How active are you in your community? Like I said, career progression. I mean, I think candidates are really more discerning than ever before, and talent is hard to get. And as you said, David, wide playing field. Like, you don't need to be 20 minutes, outside the office. The brick and mortar office buildings.
Yeah.
Not anymore. It's hard.
Look, I think there's some fantastic food for thought there for HR and talent leaders. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. I know that the conference is obviously coming up in March, at the end of March, so I hope that you enjoy that as well.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the honor of being part of your platform and having a voice on behalf of Zoom.
If you've enjoyed today's episode of In Conversation With, stay on the Harvey Nash Group website, have a look around. This is one of 5 episodes in this run, all focused on the US market. And as we've mentioned, there is Unleash America at the end of March, so check out that conference too.